Souphanouvong, the Red Prince and the Unlikely Path of Laos's First President. Part 1. A Prince is Born. Origins, Heritage, and Early Education. Prince Souphanouvong, one of the most pivotal figures in the modern history of Laos, was born on 13th July 1909 in the ancient city of Luang Prabang, specifically at the Palace Sisuvana in the district of Giengdong. At the time, Luang Prabang was not only a symbolic center of Lao royal tradition, but also one of the most important cities in French-controlled Indochina. Souphanouvong entered the world during a time of significant change, both within his country and across Southeast Asia, as colonial pressures reshaped the region's political, social, and economic landscape. His father, Prince Bongkong, was the last appointed viceroy of Luang Prabang, a high-ranking and influential noble who maintained considerable prestige within the royal court and among the Lao elite. Prince Bongkong's political connections and royal lineage placed his family at the center of the aristocratic circles that had governed the region for generations. However, the family tree of Souphanouvong was uniquely complex and foreshadowed much of the duality and contradiction that would characterize his later life. While his father hailed from the highest echelons of Lao nobility, Souphanouvong's mother, Mam Kam Uwan, was not of royal descent. She was a commoner, and her lower social status sharply distinguished Souphanouvong from many of his royal half-brothers. This maternal distinction proved crucial in shaping both the trajectory and outlook of the young prince. Unlike his half-brothers Suvana Phuma and Phetsarath Ratanavongsa, who enjoyed full recognition and privileges associated with pure royal lineage, Souphanouvong was subtly sidelined in courtly matters. His partial royal identity would become both a burden and a motivation. Although he was still raised with education and opportunities befitting his class, the shadow of his mother's non-noble heritage made him, in some ways, an outsider within his own family and court. This tension would later manifest in his political leanings, personal sympathies, and his pursuit of a more inclusive vision of national leadership that defied rigid class distinctions. From an early age, Souphanouvong demonstrated academic promise. He received his primary and secondary education in the French colonial school system, which had taken deep root in Indochina. His studies eventually led him to the prestigious Lycée Albert Sarraut in Hanoi, the capital of colonial French Indochina. This elite institution was known for educating the sons of prominent Vietnamese, Laotian, and Cambodian families, particularly those destined for leadership positions under French patronage. There, the young prince was exposed to both the rigidity of French colonial ideology and the emerging nationalist ideas that were quietly fermenting among local intellectuals. Eager to further his education, and perhaps driven by a desire to establish his merit beyond his compromised birthright, Souphanouvong pursued higher studies in France. He was accepted into the École nationale des ponts et chaussées, National School of Bridges and Roads, in Paris, one of France's most respected engineering institutions. This move was not only prestigious, but highly unusual for a Laotian prince at the time, and it marked a significant divergence from the traditional roles assigned to royalty. During his time in Paris, he specialized in civil engineering, gaining rigorous training in infrastructure design, structural engineering, and modern construction practices. He also worked at the French port of Le Havre, where he gained hands-on experience in engineering operations. In these formative years, Souphanouvong developed a deep respect for modern science, planning, and rationalism, qualities that would later influence his vision for national development. He graduated in 1937 and returned to Southeast Asia, where he began work with the French colonial authorities in public infrastructure. He was assigned to the Public Works Bureau in Nha Trang, a coastal city in central Vietnam, where he was responsible for building and maintaining roads, bridges, and other critical infrastructure. His career took him throughout central Vietnam and parts of Laos, giving him a rare opportunity to observe firsthand the vast disparities between colonial administration, rural poverty, and the potential of modern development. Throughout this early period, Souphanouvong remained a loyal servant of the colonial administration, appearing more as a technocrat than a political agitator. Yet the seeds of future transformation had already been planted. His exposure to the lives of common people in Vietnam and Laos, many of whom lived in dire poverty and under heavy-handed rule, stirred a growing sense of social consciousness within him. These experiences, combined with his identity as a prince born of both nobility and commoner blood, positioned Souphanouvong to eventually bridge two worlds, the elite and the oppressed, the monarchic past and the revolutionary future. By the time the Second World War erupted, Souphanouvong was a highly educated, worldly individual, fluent in French, comfortable in modern engineering circles, and increasingly aware of the political undercurrents sweeping across Southeast Asia. Although still working under the colonial system, his transformation had begun. Within a few years, he would abandon engineering for revolution, leaving behind the bridge builder's role in a literal sense to become a builder of political movements, ones that would change the fate of his nation forever. Part 2. From Engineer to Revolutionary, Embracing the Anti-Colonial Struggle. By the time World War II neared its conclusion, Southeast Asia had become a cauldron of upheaval, uncertainty, and rebellion. The weakening grip of the European colonial powers, especially that of France and Indochina, had given birth to a new political awakening. Among those swept into this historical current was Prince Souphanouvong, who, though trained as a civil engineer, found himself drawn ever deeper into the growing nationalist and anti-colonial movements. In 1945, as Japan surrendered and withdrew from its wartime occupation of Indochina, a rare and fleeting window opened for independence movements across the region. Laos, long a French protectorate and deeply embedded within the structure of Indochinese colonialism, found itself at a crossroads. In the power vacuum left by the Japanese collapse, nationalist leaders scrambled to fill the void before the French could return to reassert their dominance. It was during this turbulent moment that Souphanouvong made a decisive political turn. No longer content to build roads and bridges under colonial directives, he sought to build a new future for his country. He initiated contact with the Viet Minh, the formidable Vietnamese revolutionary force led by Ho Chi Minh, which had rapidly emerged as the most powerful anti-colonial organization in the region. The connection between Souphanouvong and the Viet Minh would prove fateful for himself, for Laos, and for the entire course of the Laotian Revolution. Traveling to Hanoi in 1945, Souphanouvong met personally with Ho Chi Minh. The meeting left a profound impression on him. He was inspired by the Vietnamese leader's vision, determination, and ability to unify the masses around the cause of independence. Where others saw communism with suspicion or as a foreign ideology, Souphanouvong saw in Ho Chi Minh's movement a model for Laos, a disciplined, organized, and ideologically committed front that could realistically challenge colonial rule. This encounter led Souphanouvong to embrace the Indochinese communist cause, not necessarily out of deep Marxist conviction, at least not at first, but out of pragmatic alliance building and a shared anti-colonial sentiment. He soon became a key figure in the newly formed Lao Issara, Free Laos movement, a broad-based coalition of nationalists seeking to end French control and establish an independent Laos. His royal heritage, coupled with his growing revolutionary fervor, gave him both legitimacy and influence. Initially, Souphanouvong served as the provincial chairman of the Lao Issara in Thakek, an important town in southern Laos near the Mekong River. There he began organizing local resistance, drawing upon his engineering background to help coordinate logistics and infrastructure for the movement. His responsibilities quickly expanded, and he was appointed foreign minister of the Lao Issara government in exile. Simultaneously, he took up the role of commander-in-chief of the newly formed Armée de Libération et de Défense Lao, Army for the Liberation and Defense of Laos. His commitment to forging a strong military alliance with the Viet Minh was unshakable. While many in the Lao Issara leadership were wary of becoming too closely tied to Vietnamese communists, Souphanouvong believed that unity among the anti-colonial movements of Indochina was the only viable path to success. On November 1945, he boldly signed a mutual assistance agreement between the Lao Issara and the Viet Minh, cementing a relationship that would define Laotian politics for decades to come. However, unity came at a cost. Many Lao nationalists feared Vietnamese domination or subjugation of their movement. They were also skeptical of communist ideology and resistant to its atheistic and revolutionary tenets, which clashed with Laos's deeply Buddhist and hierarchical traditions. But Souphanouvong pushed forward, convinced that cooperation with the Vietnamese was essential to achieving liberation. This conviction was soon put to the test. On 21st of March 1946, French forces, seeking to reimpose colonial order, launched a military assault on Pathet. In the battle that followed, Souphanouvong's forces were decisively defeated. During the fighting, he sustained injuries and was forced to flee across the Mekong River into Thailand. He joined other exiled Lao Issara leaders in Bangkok, where they continued their struggle from abroad. Exile proved to be a time of reflection and deepening political rifts. Although Souphanouvong had risen quickly within the Lao Issara, his insistence on close cooperation with the Viet Minh began to create friction within the movement. Many of his colleagues viewed his pro-Vietnamese stance with suspicion, accusing him of compromising Laos's sovereignty for the sake of ideological allegiance. Tensions eventually boiled over, and in March 1949, Souphanouvong resigned from his position as foreign minister of the government in exile, citing irreconcilable differences with the other leaders. This resignation marked a decisive turning point in his life. Disillusioned with the internal squabbles of the Lao Issara leadership and convinced of the Viet Minh's commitment to regional liberation, Souphanouvong increasingly aligned himself with the communist strategy for Southeast Asia. Though his precise ideological commitments at the time remained ambiguous, his actions spoke of a man who had chosen a new path, one that would lead him away from the royal court and toward revolutionary struggle. By 1950, Souphanouvong's transformation from aristocratic engineer to revolutionary icon was nearly complete. He had endured defeat, exile, and ideological conflict, yet emerged with a renewed commitment to radical change. The next chapter of his life would see him lead a new movement that would challenge not only colonialism, but also reshape the entire political structure of Laos. Part 3, Founding the Pathet Lao, the emergence of the Red Prince. Following his resignation from the Lao Issara government in exile in 1949, Prince Souphanouvong stood at a political crossroads. Disenchanted with the divided and cautious leadership of Lao Issara, and deeply convinced of the necessity of unity with the Vietnamese revolutionaries, he chose a bold and consequential path. In August 1950, in the midst of the First Indochina War, Souphanouvong helped to convene the first official congress of a new movement, the Lao Freedom Front, Neo-Lao Issara, soon to become more widely known as the Pathet Lao. Held at the Viet Minh headquarters in Tuyen Quang, northern Vietnam, the Congress was a symbolic and strategic milestone. While Souphanouvong was unanimously elected as president of the newly established organization, the true architects of the movement were the emerging Laotian communists led by the ideologically committed and disciplined Kaysone Phomvihane. In truth, Souphanouvong served more as the respected figurehead. His royal pedigree, international profile, and fluency in French made him the ideal face of the revolutionary struggle. But behind the scenes, the Communist Party of Vietnam provided essential direction and guidance, ensuring the Pathet Lao's ideological alignment and operational support. The formation of the Pathet Lao marked a significant break from previous Laotian nationalist movements. Unlike the broader, ideologically diverse coalition of the original Lao Issara, the Pathet Lao was clearly aligned with Marxist-Leninist principles and openly dependent on support from North Vietnam. Though this made the movement more centralized and effective in military organization, it also solidified its perception among critics as a Vietnamese puppet or a vehicle for regional communist expansion. Souphanouvong, now firmly embedded in this apparatus, embraced his role with zeal, and from this period on, he became known throughout the region and the world as the Red Prince. This nickname captured the contradiction at the heart of his persona, a scion of Lao royalty leading a communist-aligned liberation movement. While many of his contemporaries found such a combination perplexing, Souphanouvong saw no contradiction. In his eyes, Laos's liberation and modernization required breaking from colonial rule, dismantling the feudal structures that held the nation back, and aligning with those forces, however radical, that offered a blueprint for national development. For Souphanouvong, Marxism was a means to an end, a tool that could help achieve independence and social progress, even if its class struggle rhetoric sat uneasily with his noble origins. At this stage, however, his personal ideological commitment to Marxist theory remained ambiguous. In conversations with Western diplomats, particularly one in Bangkok in 1949, he famously stated that Laos was a classless, Buddhist country in which communist theories had no basis. He proposed instead that Laos could become a neutral, independent nation with the help of the United States, serving as a buffer against both communism and colonialism. These remarks, while seemingly sincere, were received with skepticism. American observers, having dealt with Souphanouvong on multiple occasions, described him as a perfect liar, suggesting that his public statements were often strategic, intended to deflect suspicion or mask true intentions. Indeed, there was something elusive about Souphanouvong's true motivations. Was he a committed Marxist, a pragmatic nationalist, or a loyal client of the Vietnamese communists? Even those closest to the core leadership of the Pathet Lao, especially the Vietnamese advisors, may have struggled to fully grasp his inner convictions. Some scholars later speculated that the tight secrecy surrounding the Communist Party of Vietnam's real agenda may have extended even to Souphanouvong, who perhaps remained unaware of the deeper revolutionary strategies being implemented. What is clearer, however, is that Souphanouvong's strong ties to Vietnam were not purely political. His adult life had been largely spent in Vietnamese cities. He had studied in Hanoi, worked in Ha Trang, and married a Vietnamese woman, Nguyen Thi Ki Nam, the daughter of a civil servant. His fluency in the Vietnamese language, his familiarity with Vietnamese society, and his sense of comfort among Vietnamese intellectuals and cadres all contributed to his orientation toward Hanoi rather than Vientiane. He often remarked that educated Vietnamese were more dynamic, more politically aware than their Lao counterparts, whom he viewed as apolitical and passive. In this sense, Souphanouvong belonged to a long-standing tradition in Lao aristocracy, relying on powerful neighbors, whether Siamese, Thai, or Vietnamese, to consolidate their own authority in domestic affairs. For Souphanouvong, the Vietnamese Revolution offered a model and a source of strength that the fragmented and hesitant Laotian elite lacked. His personal affinities, political calculations, and revolutionary ideals became deeply intertwined with the fortunes of the Viet Minh, and later, the Vietnamese Communist Party. In 1955, Souphanouvong formally joined the Lao People's Party, which would eventually evolve into the Lao People's Revolutionary Party. However, true to his figurehead role, he was not incorporated into the central leadership of the party. Instead, he was appointed chairman of the newly created Lao Patriotic Front, Neo-Lao Hak Sat, which was established the following year in 1956. The front served as the public face of the communist movement and included trade unions, peasant organizations, and women's groups. It gave the Pathet Lao a broader, more accessible political identity and helped expand its influence beyond the battlefield into the political and social fabric of Laotian life. Souphanouvong's reemergence into the national political arena came at a pivotal time. In the mid-1950s, an effort was made to form a national unity government in Laos, bringing together rival factions, neutralists, royalists, and communists under a single administration. His half-brother, the moderate and pragmatic Prince Souphanouvong, served as prime minister, attempting to reconcile these divided currents. Souphanouvong, representing the Pathet Lao, was given the role of Minister for Planning, Reconstruction, and Urban Development in this short-lived unity government between 1957 and 1958. His election to the National Assembly in May 1958, where he received the highest number of votes nationwide, was a testament to his growing popularity among the common people and the effectiveness of the Pathet Lao's propaganda and mobilization efforts. Despite these signs of progress, tensions soon resurfaced. The fragile unity collapsed, and in July 1959, the new royalist-led government under Phoi Sananikone ordered the arrest of Souphanouvong and several other Pathet Lao leaders. This marked yet another dramatic turn in Souphanouvong's life: imprisonment, escape, and a return to insurgency. But that chapter would unfold in the next phase of his long and tumultuous journey. Part 4. Prisoner, Fugitive, and Diplomat. The war for Laos deepens. The arrest of Prince Souphanouvong and his Pathet Lao colleagues in July 1959 marked a dramatic reversal in the fragile experiment of political unity in Laos. After only a brief participation in government as Minister for Planning, Reconstruction, and Urban Development, Souphanouvong was once again cast as an enemy of the state. The royalist-led government, increasingly aligned with anti-communist forces and under pressure from the United States, viewed the Pathet Lao as a growing internal threat. The arrests were part of a broader campaign to suppress leftist elements and reassert control in a country teetering on the brink of civil war. Imprisoned in Vientiane, Souphanouvong was held in relative isolation. While the exact details of his imprisonment were never fully disclosed, it is known that he endured both physical hardship and political humiliation. The man who had once been a cabinet minister and the most popular candidate in the 1958 elections was now confined by a government that considered him a traitor. But his imprisonment did not dampen his resolve. It hardened it. In a dramatic turn of events, Souphanouvong and his fellow detainees escaped captivity in May 1960. The circumstances surrounding the escape remain murky. Some suggest it involved external assistance from Pathet Lao sympathizers or possible collusion within the prison itself. But what is clear is that Souphanouvong fled north, making his way to the Pathet Lao stronghold in Sam Noya, deep in the mountainous province of Hua Phan. This remote region, which bordered North Vietnam, had long served as a base for anti-royalist forces, and now it became the de facto headquarters of the Pathet Lao insurgency. From this mountainous redoubt, Souphanouvong resumed his leadership role in the revolutionary cause. The escape elevated his stature once more, both as a symbol of resistance and as a figure who had endured imprisonment and lived to fight again. The Pathet Lao broadcast his escape widely, framing it as proof of the regime's illegitimacy and his own indomitable spirit. Once again, the Red Prince was at the center of national and international attention. In the early 1960s, the Laotian Civil War intensified. The conflict, though rooted in domestic rivalries, had become deeply entangled in the Cold War rivalries of the superpowers. The United States supported the royalist government in Vientiane, fearing a communist domino effect in Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China lent varying degrees of support to the Pathet Lao through their Vietnamese allies. Laos became a battlefield in a larger geopolitical struggle, its people caught in the crossfire of ideologies and foreign ambitions. Souphanouvong, though not the military commander on the ground, that role belonged increasingly to Kaysone Phomvihane, remained the political face of the Pathet Lao. His fluent French and cultivated manner made him an effective spokesperson in international diplomacy, particularly in the multilateral negotiations that aimed to bring peace to the embattled country. From 1961 to 1962, a series of high-level negotiations culminated in the International Agreement on the Neutrality of Laos, signed in Geneva in July 1962. The agreement, backed by both the United States and the Soviet Union, was a remarkable diplomatic effort to restore balance in Laos and end foreign interference. It mandated the withdrawal of foreign troops and the establishment of another coalition government that included all major factions. Souphanouvong played an active role in the negotiation process, working alongside his half-brother Souphanouvong Phomvihane, who once again assumed the post of prime minister in the new coalition government. In this new arrangement, Souphanouvong was appointed deputy prime minister and minister of economy and planning. The hope was that this second unity government would succeed where the first had failed, establishing a stable, neutral, and independent Laos. However, the unity proved short-lived. Tensions soon resurfaced as ideological divisions, mistrust, and external pressure strained the coalition. The assassination of leftist Foreign Minister Kaysone Phomvihane on 1st April 1963, an act widely suspected to have been orchestrated by anti-communist elements within the government, sent shockwaves through the leadership. The killing marked a violent breakdown in the coalition's internal coherence, and once again, Souphanouvong found himself in an untenable position. Following the assassination, Souphanouvong withdrew from the government and returned to Samnuya, rejoining the Pathet Lao in their base of operations. This move symbolized the collapse of the Second Unity government and the beginning of an intensified civil conflict that would rage for more than a decade. By now, Souphanouvong had become a seasoned revolutionary, twice a prisoner, twice a government minister, and repeatedly a negotiator for peace. But while his experiences gave him depth and credibility, they also revealed a recurring theme in his career: a belief in unity that was repeatedly shattered by deeper ideological and structural fractures within Lao society and its political elites. It wasn't until 1967 that Souphanouvong publicly and explicitly embraced Marxism-Leninism as his official ideological stance. This declaration came after years of ambiguity and speculation. Whether this move reflected a genuine transformation of personal conviction or a calculated assertion of loyalty to his Vietnamese allies and Pathet Lao comrades is a matter of historical debate. Some scholars suggest he had long since accepted the framework of communist revolution, but delayed a formal declaration to preserve his broader appeal. Others argue that it was a political necessity, one demanded by shifting alliances and the need to assert unity within the revolutionary ranks. Whatever the truth, by the end of the 1960s, Prince Souphanouvong had fully transformed from a French-educated engineer and royal son into the symbolic leader of a Marxist revolution. He had crossed a long and treacherous road through diplomacy, war, imprisonment, and exile to reach a point of no return. The final confrontation for the future of Laos loomed on the horizon, and Souphanouvong would be at the center of its final chapter. Part 5, Revolution Consolidated, Towards Victory and the Fall of the Monarchy. As the 1960s turned into the 1970s, Laos was engulfed in full-scale civil war. What had begun as a power struggle between nationalist factions and colonial powers had evolved into a brutal, drawn-out conflict that mirrored and intersected with the broader Vietnam War. In this setting, Prince Souphanouvong, though often operating in the background as a political figurehead, remained a critical part of the Pathet Lao's identity and international representation. Following his public declaration of adherence to Marxism-Leninism in 1967, Souphanouvong's role became more clearly aligned with communist ideology. No longer ambiguously positioned between pragmatism and revolution, he now presented himself as a committed revolutionary leader. This ideological clarity served the dual purpose of strengthening unity within the Pathet Lao ranks and solidifying trust with North Vietnam, which was increasingly essential as the war dragged on. Although Souphanouvong was not the chief military strategist of the Pathet Lao, those responsibilities were primarily handled by Kaysone Phomvihane and other younger cadres. He remained highly visible. His presence lent legitimacy and a human face to the movement. As a royal by blood and a revolutionary by deed, he was uniquely positioned to challenge the Lao monarchy's claim to legitimacy. In fact, his very existence symbolized the convergence of Laos's ancient past with its revolutionary future. Tragedy struck close to home during this period. In the midst of the Civil War, Souphanouvong's eldest son was killed in combat. This personal loss further hardened his resolve and strengthened his identification with the Pathet Lao's cause. For Souphanouvong, the revolution had long ceased to be a political career. It was now deeply intertwined with personal sacrifice and the destiny of his family. Amid the intensifying conflict, Souphanouvong made several attempts to build a bridge between the Pathet Lao and other factions. He remained committed to the vision of a united Laos, one that could balance ideological divisions while asserting its independence. In the early 1970s, he once again pushed for negotiations with his half-brother, Souphanouvong, and other neutralist leaders to bring an end to the violence. This effort resulted in renewed peace talks in 1972 and 1973. These negotiations eventually produced the Vientiane Agreement of 1973, a ceasefire accord between the royalist government and the Pathet Lao. Though the agreement nominally restored national unity and attempted to share power, it was widely seen as a tactical move by the Pathet Lao, who were gaining ground militarily and politically. Under the terms of the agreement, a third coalition government was formed. Souphanouvong chose not to take a ministerial post in this new administration, possibly to maintain a symbolic distance as a neutral figure of higher stature. Instead, he assumed the presidency of the National Political Consultative Council, a body tasked with guiding policy and shaping the nation's direction during this transitional period. It was during this time that the Pathet Lao solidified their influence throughout northern and eastern Laos. With increasing support from North Vietnam and with American attention focused on the withdrawal from Vietnam, the revolutionary momentum became unstoppable. The fall of Saigon in April 1975 and the collapse of Phnom Penh earlier that same month signaled the disintegration of the anti-communist front in mainland Southeast Asia. The final chapter of the Laotian monarchy unraveled swiftly in the face of this revolutionary wave. By May 1975, the Pathet Lao had entered Vientiane, the capital, virtually unopposed. The coalition government collapsed, and the royal family, including King Phomvihane and Crown Prince Vong Savang, were taken into custody. There was no large-scale violent overthrow or bloodbath in the capital, but the monarchy's end was complete and irreversible. With this turn of events, Prince Souphanouvong stood on the threshold of his greatest political achievement. After 3 decades of exile, rebellion, negotiation, and war, he had helped lead a revolutionary movement to final victory. On 2 December 1975, the Lao People's Democratic Republic was formally proclaimed. The monarchy was abolished, and a new era of socialist governance began. In this new state structure, Souphanouvong was appointed as the first president of the republic, becoming the head of state of a unified, communist-led Laos. Though the title of president was largely ceremonial, real power lay in the hands of Kaysone Phomvihane, who served as prime minister and head of the Lao People's Revolutionary Party. Souphanouvong's appointment was immensely symbolic. It was a deliberate and strategic move by the revolutionary leadership. His royal bloodline reassured segments of the population who had once feared the revolution's radicalism. His revolutionary credentials and years of exile reinforced his status among the party faithful. His presidency was the bridge between Laos's past and its socialist present. As president, Souphanouvong served primarily as a unifying figure, a respected elder who could represent the country to the outside world while helping to foster internal stability. From 1975 to 1986, he held this role while the new government embarked on the difficult process of socialist transformation, nationalizing industries, collectivizing agriculture, and aligning Laos closely with the Soviet Union and Vietnam. The shift to a centrally planned economy brought hardship and dislocation, but Souphanouvong remained a constant public presence, appearing at national ceremonies, receiving foreign delegations, and issuing public statements of support for the revolution. In 1986, due to advancing age and declining health, he ceased active participation in state affairs. Vice President Phomvihane began acting on his behalf. Yet Souphanouvong retained the title of president until 1991, when Kaysone Phomvihane formally succeeded him in the post. Even after stepping down, he was named advisor to the party central committee, a largely honorary position that acknowledged his legacy without involving him in day-to-day governance. The revolution had been won, the monarchy had fallen, and Prince Souphanouvong, the Red Prince, had transformed himself from a sideline royal son into the titular head of a communist republic. Yet in the years that followed, questions would linger about the contradictions he embodied and the legacy he would leave behind. Part 6, the presidency, symbol of unity in a socialist state. When Prince Souphanouvong assumed the presidency of the Lao People's Democratic Republic in December 1975, it was a culmination not just of his personal journey, but of decades of revolutionary struggle, foreign alliance building, ideological battles, and sacrifice. The role he stepped into was not executive in nature, unlike the positions of Kaysone Phomvihane, who held the real power as the party's general secretary and prime minister, but it was nonetheless significant. Souphanouvong served as the public face of the new Lao state, a unifying figure capable of giving the regime a measure of legitimacy in the eyes of both domestic populations and foreign governments. As president of Laos, Souphanouvong served for more than a decade, from 1975 to 1986 in active capacity, and officially retained the post until 1991. His presence helped solidify a vision of revolutionary continuity and national unity during a period of profound political and economic transformation. For many Lao citizens, the new political order was unfamiliar, and the dismantling of the monarchy was a jarring rupture with centuries of tradition. Souphanouvong, as a prince who had fought for the revolution, represented a bridge between these worlds. His presidency coincided with the most radical phase of socialist restructuring in Laos. The new government, heavily inspired by Soviet and Vietnamese models, moved quickly to nationalize private property, abolish traditional landholding systems, and establish collectivized agricultural zones. The central planning mechanisms put in place were designed to shift the country from a semi-feudal economy into a modern socialist system. However, the transition was fraught with difficulties. Agricultural yields dropped, food shortages became common, and many rural communities resisted the collectivization process. Souphanouvong's public speeches and statements during this time often focused on the need for unity, self-reliance, and loyalty to the revolutionary ideals. He consistently emphasized themes of national sovereignty, peace, and resistance to imperialism, echoing decades of rhetoric from his years in the Pathet Lao. His role involved presiding over official ceremonies, receiving international guests, visiting provinces to bolster morale, and delivering keynote addresses at congresses and national celebrations. One of his most important symbolic functions was presiding over the Supreme People's Assembly, Laos's national legislature. As president of the assembly from 1975 to 1988, Souphanouvong formally endorsed laws and resolutions that codified the new order. Though the legislature functioned largely under the direction of the ruling party, it was essential for the establishment of new institutions and legitimizing the state's authority in the eyes of the population. On the international stage, Souphanouvong was an important diplomatic figure during a time when Laos was seeking to consolidate its position within the global socialist bloc. He traveled to allied nations, particularly the Soviet Union, near Vietnam, and other Eastern Bloc states, where he was warmly received as a hero of the anti-colonial struggle. These visits helped secure economic assistance and political support for Laos, which was heavily dependent on foreign aid during its early years of socialist transition. However, despite these diplomatic gestures, Laos remained largely isolated from the broader international community. Western nations, particularly the United States and its allies in Southeast Asia, were wary of the new regime. The legacy of Cold War politics made engagement difficult, and Laos was seen in many quarters as a Vietnamese satellite. Souphanouvong, who had long advocated close ties with Hanoi, did little to dispel this perception. Yet he remained personally popular among many Vietnamese leaders, and his historical ties to Ho Chi Minh and other figures of the Vietnamese Revolution continued to serve as diplomatic capital. Domestically, Souphanouvong's advanced age and limited role in executive decision-making meant that he increasingly took on the status of a revered elder statesman rather than an active administrator. He became a living symbol of the revolution's moral legitimacy, a reminder of the long and difficult road that had led to independence and sovereignty. By the mid-1980s, however, change was once again on the horizon. Across the communist world, reform movements were gaining strength. The Soviet Union had entered the era of Mikhail Gorbachev's perestroika and glasnost, and even in Vietnam, the Doi Moi reforms were being prepared. In Laos, signs of internal fatigue and economic strain became increasingly evident. The central planning model was failing to deliver meaningful prosperity, and voices within the party began calling for cautious economic liberalization. In 1986, as Souphanouvong's health deteriorated, he quietly withdrew from most official functions. Vice President Phomvihane began acting in his stead, and in 1991 the formal transition occurred. Kaysone Phomvihane, who had led the party and government from behind the scenes for decades, succeeded him as president of the republic. Even after his retirement from formal politics, Souphanouvong was not completely removed from national life. He was named an advisor to the party's Central Committee, a symbolic role that recognized his historical contributions without assigning him governing responsibilities. In this role, he occasionally appeared at national events and remained a respected, even venerated figure within the party and among much of the population. The revolutionary generation was gradually giving way to a new leadership class, one less shaped by the fires of anti-colonial struggle and more concerned with economic development and modernization. Yet Prince Souphanouvong's legacy remained etched in the foundations of the state he had helped to build. His image adorned posters and official publications. Schools and public buildings were named after him. His speeches continued to be quoted in party literature. By the end of his presidency, Souphanouvong had transformed from the rebellious outsider and the Red Prince of wartime propaganda into the grandfatherly statesman of a socialist nation. His journey had taken him through every major upheaval of 20th century Laotian history: colonialism, revolution, civil war, and the forging of a new state. In each phase, he had reinvented himself: engineer, guerrilla, diplomat, politician, and finally national patriarch. Part 7. Legacy and Reflection. A life woven into the nation's story. As Prince Souphanouvong stepped away from the public spotlight in the late 1980s, he did so not in disgrace or obscurity, but as a figure revered, if not always fully understood, by both the political class and the public. For a man born into royalty but remembered as a revolutionary, his life story had become inseparable from the modern history of Laos itself. In retirement, Souphanouvong lived quietly in Vientiane, surrounded by family and longtime comrades. Though no longer involved in day-to-day governance, his influence remained deeply woven into the symbolic fabric of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. He continued to be recognized as one of the nation's founding fathers, and the state worked to enshrine his legacy as a cornerstone of Lao socialism. One important component of that legacy was his role as a unifying figure. Despite his association with the Pathet Lao and Marxist ideology, Souphanouvong never lost sight of the idea that Laos needed to be more than a state ruled by one faction. Throughout his career, from his early overtures to the Viet Minh, to his participation in unity governments, to his presidency, he had consistently championed the idea of national cohesion. This balancing act, walking the line between ideological revolution and national inclusivity, was not without contradictions, but it allowed the new regime to present itself as the legitimate heir of the entire Laotian historical experience, not merely a radical break from the past. In this spirit, the Lao government carefully curated his image. While real power had always been concentrated in the hands of the party's inner circle, particularly figures like Kaysone Phomvihane and Nuhak Phumsavan, Souphanouvong's symbolic importance could not be overstated. His royal background helped lend an air of continuity between pre-revolutionary and post-revolutionary Laos. His French education and international exposure made him a palatable figure to foreign diplomats and international media. His decades of exile, resistance, and sacrifice cemented his credibility among revolutionary ranks. His family, too, remained part of the national story, albeit in increasingly complex ways. Souphanouvong had married Nguyen Thi Ki Nam, a Vietnamese woman from a respected family, many years earlier. Their marriage had not only personal but political dimensions. It was emblematic of the deep ties between the Lao and Vietnamese communist movements, and symbolized the fraternity of the two revolutionary struggles. Together they had 10 children, some of whom became involved in state and party institutions. Yet not all of his descendants followed the revolutionary path. Most notably, his son Kaysone Phomvihane would become the subject of international attention when he fled Laos in 2000 and sought political asylum in New Zealand. This surprising development, years after his father's death, created ripples in political circles, raising difficult questions about the internal dynamics of the ruling family and the perceived constraints of life under a one-party state. Souphanouvong himself, however, did not live to see this unfolding. He passed away on 9 January 1995 in Vientiane due to complications from heart disease. He was 85 years old. His death marked the end of an era, the passing of the last of the revolutionary three princes who had once embodied the rival visions for Laos: royalist Boon, neutralist Souphanouvong, and communist Souphanouvong. Of the three, it was Souphanouvong who had prevailed, not merely militarily or politically, but ideologically, with the Lao People's Democratic Republic now firmly established as the sole governing authority. In recognition of his role in shaping modern Laos, the government declared 5 days of national mourning. State media eulogized him as a national hero, a tireless champion of independence, and a guiding light of the revolution. Flags were lowered to half-mast. State institutions published tributes recounting his decades of service. His funeral, attended by high-ranking party members, foreign diplomats, and ordinary citizens alike, reflected the breadth of his impact. Initially, he was buried near Pathet Lao, the most sacred Buddhist monument in Laos and a powerful symbol of the nation's spiritual and historical identity. This choice of burial site further underscored his dual legacy, as both a secular revolutionary and a royal-born son of a devout Buddhist society. In 2012, his remains were moved to the newly constructed National Cemetery in Vientiane, alongside other prominent figures of the Lao People's Revolutionary Party. This move, made as part of a broader effort to institutionalize the memory of the revolutionary generation, reflected the enduring significance of his legacy. His name was given to schools, roads, and government buildings. His image was printed on postage stamps and featured in official exhibitions. Each year on his birthday and death anniversary, commemorative ceremonies continued to be held in his honor. But beyond official state recognition, Souphanouvong's life prompted more nuanced reflections as well, particularly among historians and observers of Southeast Asian politics. Was he a sincere believer in Marxism or a pragmatic nationalist who used communist alliance as a vehicle to liberate his homeland? Was he manipulated by the Vietnamese, or did he knowingly align with their cause out of personal and strategic conviction? Was his revolution truly Lao in character, or merely a local manifestation of a broader Vietnamese agenda? These questions persist, and perhaps they always will. But what remains beyond dispute is that Prince Souphanouvong was a man of remarkable adaptability, resilience, and vision. He lived through colonialism, World War, revolutionary struggle, and the birth of a new state. He moved between the worlds of royalty and revolution, engineering and politics, tradition and ideology, with a sense of purpose that few in his generation could match. Part 8. The Red Prince's Historical Image, Between Revolution and Royalty. Decades after his passing, the life and legacy of Prince Souphanouvong continue to evoke a complex and often paradoxical portrait, one that reflects the layered history of modern Laos itself. His image as the Red Prince still looms large in the nation's collective memory. A revolutionary of royal birth, a trained engineer who embraced guerrilla warfare, and a figurehead of the Lao People's Democratic Republic whose influence stretched far beyond the limits of his formal political power. The ambiguity that marked his life has only intensified with time. To his admirers, Souphanouvong is celebrated as a visionary and patriot who broke with his privileged background to join the oppressed in their fight for freedom. His willingness to renounce his aristocratic comfort and dedicate his life to the anti-colonial and socialist struggle is frequently cited in Lao government literature and textbooks as a model of self-sacrifice for national liberation. His face appears alongside other revolutionary figures in state propaganda. His name is invoked in speeches, and his legacy is commemorated in carefully orchestrated ceremonies. To the leadership of the Lao People's Revolutionary Party, LPRP, Souphanouvong remains a revered founding father. He is often portrayed as embodying the ideals of unity, discipline, and devotion to the homeland, particularly during politically sensitive moments, such as anniversaries of national independence or the party's foundation. Souphanouvong is remembered as a stabilizing figure who helped guide the nation through the turbulence of decolonization, civil war, and socialist transformation. His background in engineering is also periodically highlighted in these narratives as a symbol of his modern, technocratic mindset. While this aspect of his identity may seem at odds with the ideological fervor of Marxist revolution, it has been used by the state to underscore his belief in national development through planned progress. Roads, bridges, irrigation systems, all infrastructure that would benefit the rural poor, were projects he saw not simply as technical necessities, but as instruments of national sovereignty and dignity. Yet outside official circles, his legacy is more contested. Among diaspora communities, especially those who fled Laos during or after the communist takeover, Souphanouvong is viewed with far greater skepticism. To many Laotian exiles, particularly royalists and anti-communist refugees, he is remembered not as a national hero, but as a collaborator with Vietnamese communists and a key figure in the dismantling of the monarchy in traditional Laotian society. These communities often blame him, and the Pathet Lao leadership more broadly, for the authoritarian system that followed the revolution, including the suppression of dissent, economic hardship, and mass exodus of citizens. Even within Laos, interpretations of his legacy are not uniform. Some older citizens, particularly those who lived through the transition to the Lao People's Democratic Republic, have mixed memories of the early revolutionary years. Memories that include shortages, collectivization, and repression alongside national pride and independence. For many younger Laotians, Souphanouvong is a distant, almost mythical figure, preserved in textbooks but largely disconnected from their lived reality in a country that has increasingly opened its economy to global capitalism while still retaining one-party rule. In academia, both within Laos and internationally, Souphanouvong has become a subject of growing scholarly interest. Historians and political scientists have attempted to parse his motivations, analyze his relationships with Vietnamese leaders, and assess the degree to which he influenced state policy versus serving as a ceremonial figure. A recurring theme in this literature is the strategic use of his royal background by the Pathet Lao leadership, a calculated effort to maintain a veneer of continuity and national legitimacy, even as they overhauled the old political order. His alliance with Vietnam remains one of the most controversial and pivotal aspects of his biography. As someone who spent much of his life studying, working, and organizing in Vietnam, Souphanouvong felt an affinity with the Vietnamese intelligentsia that many Lao revolutionaries did not share. His marriage to a Vietnamese woman further cemented this bond. Critics, particularly among royalist and nationalist circles, have accused him of subordinating Laos's independence to Vietnamese interests. Supporters, by contrast, argue that without Vietnamese backing, the Lao Revolution would never have succeeded. In 2004, on what would have been his 95th birthday, the Lao state held elaborate commemorations to mark his contributions. High-ranking officials gave speeches extolling his patriotism and dedication to socialism. Newspapers published retrospectives celebrating his vision and achievements. The commemorations reinforced the state's interpretation of Souphanouvong as the soul of the revolution, a light figure, Phom Nhua Heng Kan Pativat, who remained committed to national interests, independence, and peace until his final days. One particularly resonant phrase used in these tributes was that he was the heart and soul of the Lao Revolution. This carefully constructed image highlighted both his symbolic importance and the emotional resonance his story held within the national consciousness. It also emphasized how much the state relied on his memory to project stability, unity, and historical continuity in a country where dissenting voices had long been marginalized. By integrating both the revolutionary and royalist legacies into one persona, Souphanouvong helped the state craft a national identity that was not rooted solely in class struggle or Marxist ideology, but in a broader narrative of independence, sovereignty, and cultural pride. This synthesis helped ease the social transition away from monarchy and feudalism, providing a sense of continuity even in the midst of radical change. As such, Prince Souphanouvong occupies a unique position in 20th century Laotian history. He is not just a revolutionary or a royal, a nationalist or a socialist, a politician or a patriot. He is all these things at once, a mosaic of contradictions who played a central role in guiding Laos through its most transformative era. Part 9, Final Reflections. The Man, the Myth, in the Making of Modern Laos. The life of Prince Souphanouvong stands as one of the most extraordinary political journeys in modern Southeast Asian history. From a palace in Luang Prabang to the presidency of a socialist republic, he bridged the worlds of royalty and revolution, of engineering and ideology, of tradition and transformation. His name, etched into the annals of Laotian history, remains a symbol not only of the victory of the Pathet Lao, but of the turbulent birth of a nation. Few leaders have embodied such contradiction with as much continuity: a royal prince who defied monarchy, a French-educated engineer who embraced Vietnamese-backed communism, a revolutionary who sought reconciliation with neutralists and royalists alike, and ultimately a ceremonial president who wielded less power than his title implied, but whose symbolic authority helped legitimize a radical regime. Souphanouvong's success was rooted as much in his adaptability as in his ideology. He possessed a talent for navigating shifting political currents without losing sight of his long-term goals. His pragmatism allowed him to survive, and often thrive, through war, imprisonment, exile, and fragile alliances. Whether he truly believed in Marxism-Leninism, or whether it served merely as a means to an end, may be debated by historians, but there can be little doubt that he understood the power of symbols and the necessity of loyalty within revolutionary structures. At the core of his mission was a consistent belief that Laos could and must stand as an independent, sovereign nation, free from foreign colonial domination. This conviction, born of his early years witnessing French rule, refined through his interactions with Vietnamese revolutionaries, and hardened in the fires of civil war, guided him even as his methods changed. For him, liberation was not just a political achievement, but a deeply personal one. His relationships, familial and political, reflect the wider story of Laos. His half-brother, Souphanouvong, represented moderation and compromise. His cousin Phetsarath Ratanavongsa, an early nationalist visionary. Together with Bonhomme, the staunch royalist, they were known as the Three Princes, personifying the divisions within Lao society that came to define its mid-20th century political destiny. Of the three, only Souphanouvong aligned himself decisively with the revolutionary movement and emerged victorious. The later years of his life were marked by quiet reverence, but also a degree of political ambiguity. As Laos shifted subtly toward market-based reforms in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Souphanouvong remained an icon of a revolution whose foundational principles were increasingly challenged by economic necessity. His legacy, while intact, now existed in a different ideological environment, one where growth, investment, and modernization began to take precedence over ideological purity. And yet the official narrative held. He remained the beloved president, the father of the republic, the symbol of unity. These titles, while ceremonial, reflected the enormous emotional weight his story carried. The man who had fought with words and weapons, who had endured defeat and exile, who had served in cabinets and escaped from prisons, was now venerated as the patriarch of modern Laos. Even today, nearly 3 decades after his death, Prince Souphanouvong's image is carefully maintained. Statues of him stand tall in Vientiane and other provincial capitals. His name graces roads, schools, and public institutions. His speeches and writings are still quoted in state publications. He remains a key figure in the pantheon of Laos socialism, part founding father, part revolutionary saint, part national myth. But beyond the myth lies a human story, a man born into privilege who chose to renounce it, a father who lost a son in war, A nationalist who placed his trust in a neighboring power, a statesman who served his country more through presence than policy. His complexity is what makes his story so enduring. Souphanouvong's life serves as a mirror through which to view the 20th century Lao experience: colonization, resistance, revolution, and nation-building. He was a product of his time, but he also helped shape it. His journey reflects the shifting tides of loyalty, ideology, and power in a region caught between global empires and internal divisions. In the end, the Red Prince did not just witness the transformation of Laos, he became one of its architects. His legacy remains not only in the institutions he helped establish, but in the very idea of Laos as a sovereign, unified state with a modern identity carved from ancient traditions. His contradictions were not weaknesses. They were reflections of a country that has always existed at the crossroads of cultures, faiths, and ideologies. Prince Souphanouvong's story, like the nation he helped forge, is not simple, but it is powerful, profound, and enduring.